Even before Geraldine reminded you, I'm very impressed.
Yeah, well, because and the meeting just before this, there was also because of this glitch, I wasn't able to record it. This was the best meeting we ever had. So, all right. Anyway, here we are. We're on 12A1 toward the bottom of the page, and we've dealt with a bunch of things, and now we're still now we're going back to. As it says, the Gemara returns to its exegesis of the Megillah. So we're working verse by verse, phrase by phrase. And this, as note 14 says, this will be, we're up to the third verse in the Megillah itself. And here, right? So this, we had the setting already. And in the days of Achashverosh, this is Achashverosh who reigned from Hodu to Kush, 127 states, provinces. In those days, when the king Achashverosh was sitting on his royal throne, which was in the city of Shushan, in the third year of his kingship, he made a party for all of his officers and servants. And here's where we come up to now. Chel paras umadai tamim, right? So the host, the army of Persia and Media and not Media, right? But Media, the noble, etc. So that's what we're up to. Who's going to read for us today? Josie, I can't hear you.
I'm here.
It's the last four lines, Josie. It's the last four lines on 12A1.
Good.
Can't hear you.
Josie, you're muted.
I'm having trouble finding the page, so
12A1.
I don't know where it is. So somebody else should start.
It says on the top corner, on the right-hand corner, it says 12A1.
Oh. The Gemara returns to his,
Right there, you got it,
okay.
right? It's exegesis of the Megillah, right? Exegesis means that it learns, it draws out from the verses what its meaning is. Okay, good. So now that you found it, do you want to read it or do you want to let Bill read it?
I think Bill should, because now I can't find the next page. It should be 12A2. I defer to you, Bill. Go ahead.
All right. All right. Here I am.
11.
Bottom of right-hand column of 12A1. The Gemara returns to its exegesis of the Megillah. It is written, the army of Persia and Media, the nobles. And it is written elsewhere of the kings of Media and Persia.
Okay, so this is an what are they noticing? If you look in the most I think the most reasonable explanation is the Gemara is asking which comes first. Is it Persia and Media, or is it Media and Persia? Right? Which, you know, sometimes we have a verse that puts Persia first, and sometimes we have a verse that says Media first. So which one is it? Next page, 12A2.
Page. The Gemara explains the discrepancy. Rava said, Persia and Media stipulated with one another as follows. If kings of the realm come from our people, governors will come from your people. And if kings come from your people, governors will come from our people. Thus, the two verses reflect this arrangement. At times, a Mede sat on the throne and Persians served as provincial governors, while at other times the situation was reversed.
Okay, so this is a kind of a practical working out of the basic idea, which is it meant that since one country is not preeminent over the other, sometimes you mention one, and then sometimes you mention the other one first. We have a similar discussion in the Gemara, where in the Ten Commandments, we have kabed et avicha v'et imecha. Honor your father and mother. And then in Kedoshim, in the Holiness Code, it says, Ish imo v'aviv tiro. Each person should revere their mother and father. So the Gemara notices in the Ten Commandments, it says the father and then the mother. And in Leviticus, it says the mother and then the father. So what's the story? The answer is, says the Gemara, that they're equal. They're equal in your obligations to honor them and revere them and to treat them properly, right? There is no, favoritism of one or the other. So practically speaking here, says Rava, it meant that they were willing to share power and, whichever worked out, worked out. We have in, supposedly, although it hasn't happened yet, supposedly in Israel, we have a power sharing arrangement in the coalition that right now Naftali Bennett is the prime minister, and in 2 years, Yair Lapid will be the prime minister because they've agreed that that's how they're going to share power. So one and the other. Okay, good.
The Megillah continues. When he displayed the riches of his glorious kingdom, Rabbi Yosei Bar Chanina said, Scripture teaches that Achashverosh donned priestly garments at this occasion, for it is written here, the honor of his splendorous greatness, and it is written there for glory and for splendor. The connecting word Tiferet, splendor, intimates that at this feast, Achashverosh adorned himself with the raiment of the Kohen Gadol, which had been looted from the temple during the conquest of Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay, so this is actually when we have the beginning of the verse, when he displayed the riches of his glorious kingdom, haroto et osher kavod malchuto. The comment doesn't actually refer to that part of the verse. It refers to the very next words. Right? And then the Gemara notices the word tiferet, makes an associative connection between the word tiferet here and the word tiferet that the Torah describes the purpose of the priestly garments that are so beautiful and so ornate. Therefore tiferet, therefore beauty and awesome, impressive, glorious appearance. So what the Gemara does is it makes these two connected and adds a little dollop of sadness and resentment. We're in the 9 days now, going to Tisha B'Av. So the Zohar sees the Gemara sees this as reflective of the exile, and that look who's looking so spiffy and so wonderful. It's Achashverosh. At whose expense? At the expense of the high priest, at the expense of the Jewish people. So how did he look? How could he possibly look so wonderful? How could he look so impressive? Clearly, the most impressive thing he could possibly do is to steal the garments of the high priest and wear them. That would be the most impressive thing to do. So there's a bitterness that is added here, and recognizing again that the Jewish people in this story are under the thumb of a continued regime that proceeds along with the oppression of the Jewish people that was established earlier. David, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, can we deduce that the term Tiferet doesn't occur in a third or a fourth or a fifth place? It's just these two places.
It occurs in many places. This is the Zohar's Zohar. This is the Gemara. This is the Gemara's selective use of these coincidences of the fact that it's here and there, in order to make their point. So historically speaking, did Achashverosh really wear the high priest's garments? Who knows? But the underlying historical context is accurate. That's what they're really talking about, right? What they're really talking about is that here you have a regime which is, a world power, and part of its power is that it subdues and subjects the Jewish people to to being a servant people. All right. Yeah, Megillah.
Okay,
Continues.
the Megillah continues. And when these days were filled, etc. Only
Hey,
after
we're moving right along. We're up to verse 5 already.
it will be done in no time. Only after Ahasuerus entertained his subjects living in distant lands did he invite the inhabitants of the capital. His conduct is the subject of dispute between Rav and Shmuel.
Right. So let's just get the full verse here. Do they give you the full verse in the note? Yeah.
This is note 20,
Right.
note 20, yep, the note 20 from Esther 1:5. The verse continues. The king made a week-long feast for all the people who were present in Shushan, the capital, great and small alike.
So that shows that he first made a big feast. We already had that in the previous verses with all of the nobles of Persia and Media. Everybody is invited from the 127 provinces. And then after he finished, that's what it says here. And when these days of feasting and partying were finished, then he made another week-long feast for the people who were present in Shushan, for the local people. Okay, great and small alike. So the first one is a party for nobility, and the second one is a party for local people, noble or not. Right? Okay, so now we have the following comments.
His conduct is the subject of a dispute between Rav and Shmuel. One said that it indicates that Ahasuerus was a clever king, and one said that it indicates that Ahasuerus was a foolish king. The one who said that Ahasuerus was a clever king is of the opinion that he did well by first inviting the outlanders to a feast, for he could appease the people of his own city anytime he wished, since they were always nearby. And the one who said that Ahasuerus was a foolish king is of the opinion that he should have invited the people of his own city first, so that if these provincials rebelled against him, these residents of Shushan would have stood by and supported him.
Okay, so they're making these two sages are talking here not about any halacha or any moral imperatives. They're talking about realpolitik. They're talking about does this guy know what he's doing or not? If this guy wants to hold on to his power, is he being smart when he does it this way? Clearly, he's made a choice to do these two separate parties. One first for everybody, for the nobility from all over the far-flung holdings of his empire, and the second one for just for the people in town. So he made a choice. Is that a smart choice or is that a stupid choice? Is it foolish or is it shrewd? Let's look at note 21.
Note 21. The dispute between Rav and Shmuel cannot be appreciated without certain background information provided by the Targum, who queries why Ahasuerus made this banquet in the first place, and cites an opinion that the provincial governors had only recently rebelled against the crown. Having subdued their revolt militarily, Ahasuerus now sought to placate his wayward functionaries by entertaining them lavishly. Thus, one Amora regarded Ahasuerus' decision to invite the rebellious outlanders to the first banquet as particularly astute, since these people required immediate attention. Further, should the Shushanians themselves begin to show signs of revolutionary fever, Ahasuerus was positioned to take prompt action to mollify them. The other Amora, however, maintained that Ahasuerus should have first consolidated the support of the local population, his natural power base, so that if the provincials decided to renew their revolt, the people of Shushan would rally to protect their king. That's Maharsha's interpretation.
Right. So this is arguments that there is no real resolution to. We see these arguments even today. When we have this whole business of, do you cater to your base, or do you try to reach out and expand, the allies that you will have? Do you try to win over people that are not naturally your constituents, Or do you say, at the heck with them, the main thing is I have to get my own supporters to be pumped up and always be loyal. So these questions are all the time. And here we have it in relation to the Achashverosh story. Again, just to point out that the fairy tale-y kind of lighthearted way that we approach Purim only gives us a little piece of the story, and it's actually a reaction to these very difficult and really ingrained problems. This is all about living in a world where so many other people have power. How did the Jewish people negotiate their place in such a world when they themselves are not powerful, when they are not running the show? So being attentive to what's happening to the people that are your boss is part of the tricky story of the Megillah. And as we know, without giving away any secrets, Esther never tells anybody in the beginning that she's a Jew, right? This is a choice that's made early in the story. That's a very dark kind of choice, right? So all of the fun and games that we enjoy on Purim, which we should, are the result of a kind of like a feeling, taking a deep breath. No, we dodged another bullet, and here's the setting up of the context. So we also had before that Achashverosh is doing this in the 3rd year of his reign. And this is part of the question. What, if it's about him being a king already, he was a king 3 years ago. We had that on the previous page. So why doesn't he do it when he's inaugurated or when he's coronated? Why is it 3 years later? So there are all kinds of explanations we had before. But what this way of looking at it is that he's a little shaky. He's a little shaky in his position. Look at what happened to the person who was running Haiti. You don't just because you're the head of a country doesn't mean that you're going to remain the head of a country. So that's the dark stuff that's underneath the froth. Yeah, Josie.
Why is it that what's evolved is that Purim is fun and silly and a time for costumes?
So that's what I was trying to say just real quick. It's the kind of embracing, carpe diem, embrace this moment, of dodging the bullet, embrace this moment of we could die at any moment. We have died, we will die. But right now we're celebrating a moment of redemption that we insist on calling redemption, even though there's no divine obvious intervention. We're saying we're grabbing it and we're accentuating the positive no matter what. To use a modern term, we're embracing the absurd, right? The absurdity, instead of it making us depressed, makes us laugh. All right. The following dialogue.
Following dialogue between Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai and his students touches upon the verse currently under discussion. The disciples asked Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, why did the enemies of Israel of that generation deserve extermination?
So let's understand what the question is. And the note explains that the phrase enemies of Israel, Son Ehem Shel Yisrael, is a backwards phrase. It's a way of speaking, a euphemistic way of speaking, to not say what you really mean. Right? What they're really saying is, why did the Jews of that generation deserve extermination? In other words, why did they get into so much trouble? Why, if not for the fact that we got, saved at the last minute, Haman was, causing great anguish and suffering, and almost pulled it off. So what did we do so wrong that made us deserve this kind of punishment? But they don't want to say why did the Jews deserve extermination? They don't want to say something like that. They say, why did the enemies of Israel? Why did the enemies of the Jews? So that's Soneim Shel Yisrael means the opposite. Okay, that's a common language usage in rabbinic texts.
He said to them, "You say the reason." They said to him, "Because they derive." You say the reason. They said to him, "Because they derive pleasure from the feast of that wicked one, that is Achashverosh."
Okay, so what do we have here? We talked a little bit in Pirkei Avos about the fact that we got to a place where we got a kind of a window into the classroom of the study academy, of the study hall, where we saw the mentor, the sage, actually training his disciples. So here we have another little kind of glimpse into what is going on in the classroom, where the students ask their master a question, and it's a painful question, right? It's a question of self judgment and of trying to self-criticism. And what is when the master, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, when he gets asked this question, how does he deal with it? Yeah, Josie, I can see your gestures, but I can't hear you.
He turns it back to the students. You say the reason.
Right. He says, you know what? You look into it. You tell me what you think. Now, how does that play out actually? So then they give it an answer. So we don't have the timing of this. Is this something that was on their minds all the time? Is this something that they had to, spend 15 minutes discussing and then they came up with an answer? We don't know. But he wants them to come up with an answer. Right? So how does that function? Why is that his pedagogical choice here? Why doesn't he just give them an answer? Which he will in a second.
But what I'm confused about is that he answering the real question or the question that's posed the opposite way?
He understands that when they use the opposite language, he understands exactly what they mean.
Okay.
That's
So
like I said, that's the usual way that they talk.
So he's answering the real question.
Right. So, but he's saying, I want you to answer it first. So what's going on? Anybody else want to offer something? I'm asking the disciples here in the room. What's happening pedagogically?
Well, on the basis of my limited secular experience of teaching, it is possible that he doesn't want to take the responsibility for answering this question. I mean, given the reversal of the language, there could be some background stuff here that I'm not aware of, but that he may have been Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, and he doesn't want, for whatever reason, he doesn't want to put himself out there as a partisan of one party or the other. So he'd rather put it to the more or less, we don't know who the students are, the anonymous classroom, or this is several hundred years, if not more, after Socrates, but under the influence of Hellenism, he may be practicing the standard Socratic method. Socrates posed these questions. He gave 50,000, addenda and everything else, and then he said, "So, where were you in all this?" He may be doing that, so it could go either way.
Yeah, so,
I think probably the latter one, probably the Socratic method, but I don't know.
So this could be like taking that last point. This could be simply standard educational procedure, right? It's better to in order to teach your students, it's better to get the students to actually work on the answer, find the answer themselves, delve into it themselves, explore what the issues are. So there's, that's a apparently not just a modern idea. It's also,
That's right.
it's got ancient roots.
It's very old.
So, but I would actually, in this case, differ with Bill. We don't always differ, but in
But
this
often
case,
enough to keep it
yeah,
interesting.
I think in this case there is something special about this, and I think that you're touching on it a little bit. This is a sensitive question, right? This is not just any question. What does the Torah say about becoming ritually impure on Thursday or something like that? This is not that kind of question. This is a question about evaluating the Jewish people as a people, and what their moral standing is, what their standing is vis-a-vis God, right? And these are painful questions and very hard questions. So it's very dangerous. And I'm thinking also about the way things work out in my little mini, world of experience. How much do you engage? If he's gonna answer this question, what's he gonna be talking about? He's going to be saying, this is the reason that the Jewish people deserved extermination. How can the mouth even say those words?
How should you say those words?
How could you even say those words? Of course, that's part of the euphemistic turn of phrase. That's why we don't say the Jews. We say, the other ones, the enemies of the Jews. How come the enemies of the Jews deserved extermination? Because that question doesn't come up. Any Jew knows that the enemies of the Jews deserve extermination. So that's not the question. The question is the painful question that, can we even think of such an idea? Of course, in our situation in history, the obscenity of it is terrible. But any time in Jewish history and any time in any people's history, no people prima facie deserves extermination. Right? Are we really Amalek? Are we really, the face of evil? So if the sage, if the rabbi, if the teacher is going to answer that question in some way, there's a kind of a little bit of a giving in to the idea of, well, in a certain sense, the Jewish people deserve extermination.
Deserved it.
How could you even say such a thing? We're living now in a very difficult time. I'm using this. Thank you, John. As I'm speaking, there's a rally in Washington that we advertised it in Shomrei Week. It's a rally against anti-Semitism, right? So, no. Does that need to be said that we're against anti-Semitism? And yet, many people feel today very tense, very afraid, very anxious. A person who's visibly identifiable as Jewish gets stabbed on the street, and that's just like that. That's the way it goes. So these things have happened over the last few years. They've kind of like peaked. Then we sort of forget about it a little bit. Then it comes back again. Right before COVID hit, we had a whole thing in Montclair about anti-Semitism, and we had a Hanukkah gathering of the Jewish community to protest anti-Semitism. It's very, we don't deserve to be attacked. We don't deserve whatever human failings we have, whatever sins we commit. We don't deserve to be singled out, to be treated worse than all the other human beings out there that are fallible and imperfect. So the get-go part of this is no. How could you even say deserves? How did you that we should be this? It's not it's an obscene question. So I think that part of what we have here is that kind of difficulty. So we've got this rally. about anti-Semitism. So it should be a no-brainer that, of course, the Jews should, all be, signing on. Yes, I love my mother, and I love apple pie, and I don't beat my wife. So this is like obvious. Of course, there's, it's no big chiddush. It's no news to the world that the Jews don't, think anti-Semitism is good. Where's everybody else? There shouldn't be any Jews at the rally. It should all be non-Jews. It should, from one perspective, no Jews should be at an anti-Semitism rally. It should all be non-Jews who say that they're against anti-Semitism. What's the big deal that a Jew is against anti-Semitism? But of course, that's not the way it is, because this is part of a statement that we're trying to make, that stop, we're crawling out, it's a cri de coeur, right? We're calling out of our hearts that we're saying, no, stop this already. We are not going to be silent while we're being, pushed around and attacked like this. And part of it is a protest that there aren't enough allies, that we have stood in allyship, in so many causes, and we'd like to have a little reciprocity here. It's very painful. But then on top of all of this is that organizations that I support fully, that I really believe in, decided not to participate in this rally. Josie, you're shaking your head, you're muttering, I can't hear you, you're on mute. This is super painful.
Yeah.
I would have much preferred that this rally really would have been an umbrella, a big tent gathering of every single Jewish organization, because if there's anything that we agree on, then isn't it that we all think that anti-Semitism is bad? And yet, that couldn't happen. And as I say, I really respect, I belong to many of these organizations that, I think all of them, that decided not to participate in the rally. And I very much respect the wisdom and the worldly understanding that the people who run those organizations have. Why did they decide not to join? Does anybody know?
I have not, I must admit, Rabbi, that I have not followed it closely for all kinds of reasons, but apparently, as often happens under circumstances like this, the anti-Semitism overlaps with anti-Zionism. And part of I don't know quite where the organizations that you're talking about, I belong to several of them on your recommendation as well. But as I said, I didn't follow it very closely, but apparently somehow the anti-Zionists out there got somehow involved in the anti-Semitism kind of thing. And that seems to be
The other way around.
Right, so it's not, yeah, go ahead, Josie.
I think it's the other way around.
How so?
My understanding that the very far left organizations who are, depending on your point of view, rightfully upset about the treatment of the Palestinians and the Arabs, have said, you're not only pro defending the Jews, you're pro defending Israel, and we don't want to be part of that.
Well, so let me cut the difference between the two of you, and sort of make it a little bit more explicit. The concern of those organizations, the left-wing organizations, which are human rights organizations, two-state solution organizations in terms of Israel, their concern was that this rally was being framed as saying, we know anti-Semitism when we see it, and if you're anti-Israel, you're an anti-Semite. And that's what they didn't want to buy into. They didn't want to buy into that blanket condemnation that anybody that doesn't like Israel is an anti-Semite. And in fact, all the organizations that are not supporting this have been accused of being self-hating Jews, which is the same thing as saying an anti-Semite, but Jewish. They've been considered traitors. They've been, accused by Bibi and his whole cohort of supporters in Israel of being, not loyal Jews.
Enemies of the Jewish people.
Enemies of the Jewish people. And at best, what's the word? Useful fools of the anti-Semites, at best. So so the anti-Semitism question then becomes a question of who has the right or who would dare criticize the Jewish people, right? If you say anything that the Jewish people are doing is wrong, you're an anti-Semite. And this is not acceptable to these organizations, which are saying, no, there's a big difference between criticizing Israel as an anti-Semite and criticizing Israel because you want Israel to be better than it is. And that's not anti-Semitism. And there's, if we don't make that distinction a real distinction, we've lost everything. Then we're using anti-Semitism as a kind of a blanket, like the card, you collect $100 and whatever. Then you're just blackballing anybody that you don't like, that you don't want to hear what they're saying. And they wanted the rally to be limited to protesting, attacking Jews, period, verbally and physically, economically, whatever, and to take the idea of Israel, right or wrong, out of the equation. And they didn't succeed. They didn't succeed in having that done. And as a result, they decided not to participate in the rally. I think it's a tragedy. I mean, I understand what they're doing. I think, like I say, I very much respect what they do always, because they're negotiating very tricky terrain. And I think that Elisha Wiesel, who's Elie Wiesel's son and who has become the organizer of this thing and who staunchly refused to back down on this Israel thing. And then you've got organizations that are one state solution organizations that are welcome into the rally, with a flag of Israel from the Golan through the West Bank and throughout all the territories. That's Jewish pride. And anybody that questions that, is unwelcome. So we've taken something that should be absolutely, unanimous and
a no-brainer.
And we, with the great skill that the Jewish people have always had throughout the ages, we've turned it against ourselves and we're tearing ourselves apart. All of this is a long way of talking about the fact that it's very hard. It's very hard. It's not obvious. How do you talk about criticizing the Jewish people in a way that's ethical and in a way that can be heard? The prophets could do it, but that's why they were prophets. They were being forced by God to do it. Once you're not a prophet, then how do you do it? And it goes back and forth. You want to basically be very careful about it, but on the other hand, you have obligations. You have obligations to the truth. You have obligations to stand up for people who are being abused. You have obligations to try to teach your own people a better way. How do you do all that stuff? So maybe I'm piling on too much into Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai's kind of educational tactic here, but there's some wisdom here where he's saying, I want you, before I come up and start saying something, and then you're going to get insulted or you're going to get outraged, or you're going to get depressed that, look at our rabbi is so angry at the Jewish people. Maybe you can figure out, let you do a little soul searching. What do you think might have been something that shouldn't have been? that we shouldn't be engaged in. So they come up with this answer. Right. Any further comments before we just move right along here with this text? All right. So what did they answer? Somehow or other, they come up with an answer, right? And as I said, we don't know if this was in their hearts all the time, or if they had to think about it. If it was in their hearts all the time, then why did they ask their master? If they knew this answer right away, then why did they ask? So one answer is they wanted to know what he thought. Right? They wanted to hear what he had to say. What else could possibly be going on? They have an answer, but they're not happy with the answer. Right? They can only think of the following, but it's not satisfying. It's not adequate in their own eyes. It doesn't feel right. Right? So maybe they have an answer, but they don't think it's the right answer, maybe. So what is their answer?
Answer is, they said to him, because the Jews at the time, derived pleasure from the feast of that wicked one, that is Ahasuerus.
Okay, they derive pleasure from the feast of that wicked one. So before we go into a long footnote, what could that mean? What's wrong with that?
Well, it's like dining with the enemy. You know, this has come up. There's a book review in the Times today, a book review section about a man of Jewish origin. It's not clear whether he himself was still a practicing Jew, who continued to do research for Hitler and for the Hitlerite regime,
Right,
regarding somehow cancer and something like I didn't.
right. Yeah, he wasn't Jewish anymore. He wasn't Jewish anymore.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That
he was of Jewish background, so to speak. Certainly, according to the Nuremberg laws, he should have been exterminated.
Yeah,
you should pardon my phraseology.
God forbid.
But he ended up being able to survive the war and do all of his scientific work. But yeah, well, what are you saying about that?
Well, so I didn't read the review, so I don't know what the reviewer thought about it. But certainly the charge has been made about other people who survived under not a large number of them, unfortunately, survived under those circumstances. Well, all right, so you survived, good for you. But what were you doing that for? What about all your brothers and sisters who were not lucky enough to be able to worm their way into that? You should be ashamed, basically.
Yeah, it's an interesting review. I don't know if I would have time to read. I mean, apparently most of the book is about the science part.
Yeah,
so, which is out of my range.
Yeah, I'm not terribly interested in that either.
But this moral dilemma is really painful. And there's a story. Do you remember the story? The confrontation after the war in California. He's at some dinner party or something.
I don't.
And he was asked that particular question. He's like, why are you here? How did you make it? Why, and he answered, I did what I had to do because I wanted to protect the other scientists. So I did, and the work was very important. So I was able to, he says, what could I have done?
Yeah.
You remember the punchline of that story?
No, I don't.
So the punchline is that the hostess said to him, what could you have done? You could have committed suicide.
Yeah.
That would have been the honorable thing to do. But instead, you collaborated with the Nazis. So, and I don't want to say she's right. The review says, that this sort of like made him be like the emperor's, no clothes. But that's this idea that he's just collaborating with evil. Josie, what do you want to say?
But that's Hillel's question. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I?
But that question is a broader question, right? That question can be, in general, how do we deal with other people? How selfish should we be? It doesn't touch on dealing with evil, right? This wicked man, right? To sit down with the wicked man and have a congenial dinner with them, right? This is, do you go to that dinner? So this is their suggestion. But it is, I agree, it's a very tricky, a very,
How do you say no to the king when he invites you for dinner? That's a
Right,
big
right,
question.
right. Do you kill yourself? No, do you do that? Let's look at the note 24.
Note 24. Re Pinto questions why such a relatively moderate transgression deserved such drastic punishment. He answers that since, in line with his calculations, Ahasuerus believed that the time for redemption had passed, he made a great feast to celebrate the permanent destruction of the temple. Thus, whoever derived pleasure from such festivities demonstrated that he personally rejoiced over the destruction. And since the temple served as the meeting place for God and his people, rejoicing in its destruction was tantamount to renouncing our special relationship with God. Hence, there was no longer any justification for the continued existence of his unique nation.
All right, so what do we make of that very expansive intensification of the accusation?
I understand the logic of it. On the surface of it, it makes perfect sense. If A, then B, if B, then C. But there's something too much about it. It seems to be, is pushing this beyond what the evidence suggests. But I don't have any proof for any of that. It's just a feeling that I have.
Mark?
I think we're dealing with a very profound question that certainly transcends the Jews in contemporary American thought. Can you deny the basic premise of society in light of its failure to live up to its ideals? Or do you have to sustain the basic premise of solidarity even in the face of the
failure?
Of the failure to live up to the ideals? It's the whole thing with critical race theory. So to what extent is self-criticism enabled by the destruction of the basic parameters of solidarity? I mean, in the what do you call it, the wisdom things, Pirkei Avot, it says that the one sin that you're never allowed to do is the rejection of the Torah. And that's where this happens. It happens when you have to criticize something that addresses the most basic premise of the group solidarity. And that's where the problem lies. How do you, when a group of people are violating the very idea upon which they're founded, how then do you manage to criticize that? So for example, right-wing people in the United States are saying that the founding fathers all rejected slavery. Well, in a sense, that's true. They all thought that slavery was wrong, but they couldn't reject the importance of slavery in the American economic system without destroying the fabric of the basic premise of the colonies in the Confederation. That's the same thing with the rejection of the Torah. I mean, one of my problems with your drashas on the Torah is that you always find the positive, uplifting aspects of the reading, and you completely disregard, for the most part, the obvious horrible things that you then need to excuse by pointing out basic premises like, you know, God gave us permission to do genocide, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But unless you're willing to explore things like what's the value of permission to commit genocide in the name of group survival, you leave yourself in the middle of this paradox. Where do you draw the line between criticism and the basic assumptions that define the group? All right, I'm sorry, long-winded as usual.
Well, I'm sorry that you find what I'm doing inadequate. I thought I was actually doing opening up doors to the same kind of questions that you're talking about. If you read this past Torah Sparks for this Shabbos, I thought I'd do that exactly. So sorry it's not coming across, but that's exactly what we're doing now again. My question is, now that we've gotten the criticism as voiced by the students, is that so bad? Is that really having dinner with Achashverosh is a rejection of the Torah?
From my own very limited experiences, I'm thinking of different contexts, but where I've been in a position on a much smaller scale with much less consequential to do things like this, to be with people whose basic ideas I despise, but because they were in a position of authority and I had some kind of responsibility to the people that I'll use the word managing. That's not quite correct in an academic setting. And I think people are much more complex than might be suggested here. Simply going to attending this banquet, there could be any number of reasons, self-preservation being one of them, solidarity with one's fellow members of a group who themselves felt obligated to go, or one could follow the view that my Jewish anthropologist ex-wife said on the basis of anthropology studies: if they give you food, if they offer you free food, you have to go and eat it. Not as an obligation, but you're sort of be rejecting God's bounty if you don't do it. Here's Achashverosh giving a huge banquet for stuff. Why not go and exploit it? So he's the fool for inviting people who don't believe what he's doing to go and eat his food. And then you go home and say, that was pretty good food. He's still an asshole, but that was still pretty good food. Let's go again. I can see doing that. That may not answer the moral question here about I guess what we call Morris Iron.
No, you became muted.
I hit the wrong button accidentally. That's what comes from being too excited about this stuff. It might not answer the question of Morris Iron, but I can see that people would go because they're offering free food. Now you might say, and might say justly, well, that shows a kind of moral obtuseness. And I'm not arguing that they're not doing that, but to go from moral obtuseness to moral turpitude, which is what the students seem to be doing, I think that's a step too far.
Okay. Yeah. David.
Rulers are a bundle, and they do things we like and they do things we don't like. So Achashverosh is throwing a party, and I wonder to what degree, what was the importance of the destruction of the Jewish temple, the centrality of that destruction to this particular event. He may have just captured a number 127, and maybe that was a reason to celebrate. Maybe it was his birthday. I don't know. Whatever it was, maybe you like Biden a lot, but you don't want the U.S. to leave Afghanistan. Big mistake, of course. Whatever the thinking is, do you not go? I don't know. So I just wonder to what degree this writing here seems focused on the Jewish perspective, as well it should. And I just wonder to what degree the destruction of the temple is central to what was going on that party.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. I think that we are looking at this from a very, very Judeo-centric perspective, narrow, where Achashverosh maybe wasn't giving it a half a thought at all. But that's what we're doing, right? We're using our own history and our own experience as the standard, right? The criterion for measuring whether there's goodness or righteousness or evil and wickedness in the ones that we are dealing with, right? That's That's true. From Achashverosh's point of view, this is not even on his radar screen. Again, to flip around Bill's point, maybe Achashverosh, in not paying attention to that, is also exercising moral obtuseness. When certain minor genocides happen, or certain minor oppressions happen, who cares about can't even pronounce the name, the Uyghurs and
The Uyghurs.
the Uyghurs in
Uyghurs.
in Myanmar, or whatever it is, or in China, or wherever. So is that just simply being realistic about things, or is that itself a moral stain? So all of these are flowing in with one another, and that's where, again, I would say the story has a certain kind of realism to it. The students can come up with this answer, but they want somebody who has a deeper or a more genuine perspective. At least that's what they believe Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai has. And that's why they ask him. He pushes them. And to a certain extent, maybe that answer opens the door for him to be able to say what he's going to say next. So let's see what he says.
Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai replied to them, if so, if Haman's decree was a punishment for their enjoying the king's banquet, only the Jews of Shushan should have been ordered killed, for only they partook of the feast. However, the Jews in the rest of the entire world should not have been ordered killed, since they did not even attend the feast. The student said to him, since our answer is not satisfactory, you tell us why all the Jews were liable.
So all of this is a lot of extra explication, but in the original, it's much, terser.
Yeah.
So he says, Imru atem, you say. And then now they say to him, oh, you don't like what we say? Imorata. So, okay, so then what do you say? We're frustrated here. Okay, please stop holding out on us. What's the real answer?
He said to them, because they prostrated themselves to an image in the days of Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay, so what's his answer?
Not because they attended the banquet, but because they worshipped an idol.
When?
Or they gave the appearance of worshiping an idol.
When?
Not even under Achashverosh's kingship, but under his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar.
Right. So that's now, so he changes the whole thing, right? He says, no, we have to look at this not as this was very, very limited causation. He had a party, Jews came to the party, that was bad, therefore divine displeasure, right? He says, no, it works out. If it's such a broad kind of problem that the Jews are suffering, it can't be for one particular little group in one particular moment. It had to be something else. So he broadens it, and of course he also intensifies it and says this is about the entire Jewish people, except for very few exceptions, seeming to bow down, surrender to Avodah Zarah, to idolatry, right? And that is, of course, from the Jewish biblical perspective, the worst capital crime that you can. That really is denying the Torah, to use the phrase that Mark was saying before. So it really was the denying of the Torah that they did, and they were guilty of it, and therefore it took a little while, right? The wheels of justice grind slow, so it took a while, but now this was actually payback time, coming, a couple of generations later. So, okay, this is his answer. But now the conversation continues.
The disciples challenged Rabbi Shimon's explanation. The disciples then said to him, if the Jews indeed prostrated themselves to the golden image, should favoritism be shown in such a case?
Hey,
He
what
said
does
to
that
the-
mean? Favoritism be shown in such a case?
I have no idea.
Look at note 28.
That is, why were they saved by miraculous divine intervention? That's Rashi's
Right. In other words,
take on.
now the answer is too strong. Your answer is too good an answer. If they all were guilty of worshiping idolatry,
Okay.
or if they, or even giving the impression of
Worship
worshiping
an
an idol, if they were guilty of that, then they really should have been punished. So now we go around in a big circle. Now all of a sudden the hesitation, why should the Jewish people be criticized? Why should they be, subject to such terrible punishment? Now it's the opposite. You've given us such a good accusation against the Jewish people that, let them all be damned. Then they should have definitely been destroyed. So what kind of favoritism that does God show to the Jewish people? Unfair. Do the Jews actually even own heaven? Forget that they own the media and the banks and everything else.
That's right.
They also, have God wrapped around their little pinky.
But I
He-
thought,
he- sorry.
Yeah, Josie.
I thought we keep emphasizing that God is never mentioned in this story.
No, we mentioned God.
Rashi is interpreting it as
Not just
divine.
Rashi. This is all of us. Why are we celebrating Purim if God is not part of it? We're celebrating Purim because we
We're
put
saying.
God back into God is not obviously there, but we decide that God really is there.
I see.
And then we make blessings. God sanctified us with God's commandments, and God commanded us to read the
To read
Purim
the
Megillah.
And,
Did you
and
ever
I
get-
have one funny story about the Jews control everything. I live in a federally subsidized building because of financial problems. And one of my neighbors said something, "Are you going to church?" I said, "No, I'm going to the synagogue." He said, "Oh, the Jews have all the money." I said, "Well, not me, or I wouldn't be living here."
So what did they do?
He just kind of shrugged.
Right? Hey, there's an exception to every rule.
Every rule, that's right.
You are such an exceptional Jew. That what can I tell you? There's another classic joke that I can't resist not telling. Two Jews are on a train. This is in the time when Hitler is
Yeah.
in power, but things haven't happened yet. So the Jews are still traveling on the train, and one Jew is looking and seeing that the other Jew is reading the Sturmer. He's reading the Nazi anti-Semitic paper. So it all comes back, and he sees, he looks around, nobody else is around, and he says to him, "Rabbi, my Jewish brother, what are you doing? What are you reading this paper for?" He says, "When I read the other papers, I get so depressed and I get so upset. When I read this paper, it says that I'm so powerful, that the Jews run the world, that we have all the money. It makes me feel much better."
That's one of my favorite all-time jokes.
Right. So that's the joke. That joke was created at that time.
Yeah.
Was created in the 30s in Germany. All right. So here we have this question. Either or. Either we're mystified, or else it's so clear that it doesn't seem to make sense that we got out of trouble. So this is his answer. He said to them, "The Jews performed the act of prostration only outwardly because they feared Nebuchadnezzar, but in fact lacked inner conviction." Keep going.
Sorry.
We're on 12a3, moving right along.
Moving right along. Similarly, the Holy One, blessed is he, dealt with them only outwardly to frighten them into repenting. However, he never actually intended to exterminate the Jewish people. And so it is written, for he does not afflict from his heart.
Okay. So the answer that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, is that, well, it looked bad, but it wasn't as bad as it looked. Right? They complied with Nebuchadnezzar's orders, but they didn't really do it because they were worshiping the idol. They did it to save their skins. They did it to survive. They didn't mean it. So, and this, of course, has been also a leitmotif throughout Jewish history of people who are caught in these kinds of impossible situations. And, we have the stories of the Inquisition and the conversos, and we have stories all over the place throughout history. Maimonides' epistle to Yemen is about that as well. And there's a good grounds to imagine that actually Maimonides himself, for a while, behaved as a Muslim in order to save his life, until he was able to escape and get out of the more extreme Muslim regime that he was in. And that's what he tells the Yemenite Jews. He says, all right, if this is a place where you're not going to be able to live as Jews, run away, go someplace else where you can live as Jews. But meanwhile, they're doing some practical compromises, and that's what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says as well, that they didn't really mean it, so it wasn't the same terrible sin, and therefore, when God decrees that Haman should rise and put forward his plan, that was only to scare us. God never really planned for Haman to succeed. It was just, a little bit of a pushing us, to scare us, to go into a more soul-searching act of repentance, and really ask ourselves and stop being morally oblivious or morally obtuse, to use that word, to actually struggle with these questions. The verse that the Gemara cites at the end is Kilo inami libo. He does not afflict from his heart. Meaning he doesn't really mean it when he afflicts us. God does not really mean it. And that verse comes from Eichav, the scroll that we will be reading on Tisha B'Av. So let's read note 30, please.
Note 30 from Eichav 3:33. The verse reads in full, "For he does not willingly afflict or grieve the children of man." Maharsha explains, if man does not sin from his heart, milibo, I can't see the diacritical marks, but only outwardly in fear, God will cause him grief in order to motivate him to repent, never actually intending to harm him.
Okay, so the last part of Maharsha, when a person sins out of fear, shouldn't we just let it slide? Shouldn't we just let it go? And the implication here is that fear is a mitigating, extenuating element, but a sin is still a sin. So what do you do with that? How do you deal with that? And of course, that is a profound and constant question always. The poignancy of that verse, though, of course, is that this is a verse that comes from a scroll of agony, right? This is Lamentations. This is when the destruction of the temple was not threatened, but then retracted. This is not the Haman's decree that got us all scared, but then finally it disappeared, and now we can dance and have Purim as a celebration. This is Tisha B'Av text. This is about actual, real destruction and pain and death. So when Yirmiyahu, who is the traditional author of the Book of Lamentations, when he says, but God really doesn't want to really afflict us. This is part of a desperate grasping at straws that that the person who is saying this is in the midst of mourning and complete terror. So it's not a Purim situation at all. David.
There's a joke about the Russian economy. We pretend to work and the government pretends to pay us, something of that sort.
Yeah.
So what I see here is that we pretend to pray avodah zarah, and God pretends to kill us. There's something unsatisfying about these. How would you describe them? I mean, it's really acting in anger, or reacting in anger, or acting in negligence, and I don't know. It's just unsatisfying.
It leaves the question, what's this repentance about? Why is this repentance so necessary? And why is it so necessary to use such drastic, threatening means to do it? Which comes back to the question of our own self-examination. And right now, we're going to leave it as David says, with a sense of dissatisfaction. All right, next week is Tisha B'Av, but we're going to try to learn. We'll see how things develop in terms of the davening, but we're gonna try to have it continue our learning next week. Okay.
Yashar Koach.
Okay, thank you.